All right, prepping. Say got it. This thing takes forever to load. All right. We should be live.
All right. Welcome everyone to the first Vertex live stream in a minute. Today I'm joined by Paul Layton, one of the instructors at Vertex School, and Andrew Baker, one of the mentors at Vertex School. My name is Matthew Board. I am the new Chief Administrative Officer of Vertex School, and Andrew has been kind enough to join us today. We're going to go through a variety of topics, including we're going to talk a little bit about Andrew's work. We're going to talk about a little bit of career advice toward the end. We're going to talk about artificial intelligence and generating art that way, and NeRFs. For those of you that don't know what NeRFs are, those are neural radiance fields. So, Andrew, if you could just give us an introduction and, let us know what you do and where you're at and that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. It's cool. I didn't know this was like the first one that we were doing back from kind of a break. So I like this format where we can just kind of talk about some 3D art stuff. I'm Baker the Game Maker. I'm Andrew Baker, Baker the Game Maker. There are dozens, maybe hundreds of Andrew Bakers in the game and VFX fields. It's kind of a name like John Smith. So years ago, kind of as a joke, in one of my labs at the Art Institute, we were all required to set up a portfolio website, and I picked Baker the Game Maker on a whim, and it stuck with me. It's gotten me interviews. Before my art was good enough, it helped me stick out. So I've had the kind of that moniker for like 12 years, something like that. I have worked in the game industry since 2011. I've worked primarily in 3D art, environment art, Unreal Engine. I did a little Unity for a couple years when I started out, and I did a couple years of mobile development on like proprietary engines, making weird little 2D stuff. And I think we'll have a portion towards the end of this where we can go back over this in more detail, but when we kind of get into the career advice stuff. But the game industry does not look the same now as it did 10 years ago when I started out and we were making textures in Photoshop, for example. And it was kind of a weird time right around when games started being made in PBR, or with physically based rendering, was around the time I was working on these little mobile apps. It paid the bills, but my skills kind of got soft, and then the whole workflow changed. It was hard to get back into work. I eventually found a job doing training simulations for a company called Booz Allen. While I was at Booz Allen, after being there for a couple years, they will, after being there for a while, they'll pay for you to take education courses related to your skill set. I took a Vertex school class years ago, and because I felt like, okay, I'm good enough to do a 3D job, but do I really feel like my stuff is AAA? I wanted to get better in Unreal Engine. That was one of the big ones. So I had some good stuff. I had some skill set and experience, but I really wanted to improve it. So I took 3 classes total, I think, at Vertex. I'm not sure I really finished the third one, because what happened was my instructor, John Waynick, helped me, and everyone else helped me. The students in the class were awesome. Ryan's awesome. Everybody's awesome. Everybody contributed so much, but I made a fan art passion project for my big environment, which I think we called the big one the capstone then. Right now it's the individual prop. But I made a board cube for Star Trek, and Pixomondo this company called Pixomondo was starting to do virtual production for their Star Trek show. So they see this nerd making Star Trek for free in Unreal Engine, and they're like, hey, come work with us. And it was a real Cinderella story. I tell that at the start of my classes every time to the students. I can't promise you that this will happen, but I hope you will have a similar experience to what I did when I first found Vertex. So that's my background.
Great, great. So could you talk a little bit about what kind of work you do now as an environment artist?
Yeah, for sure. I'll take it back one step to when I started at Pixelmondo, and then kind of bring it into what I'm doing right now, because like there's only so much I can say on this project.
No.
But what I ended up doing with Vertex years ago was getting better in Unreal Engine, bringing in the assets, learning how to organize the assets, learning how to build modular environments as an environment artist in Unreal. And that got me hired at Pixelmondo as an Unreal generalist. So I trained in modeling and texturing and all these other different things, but I ended up, really hyper focusing on just being kind of an Unreal monkey. I bring in the stuff, I position it, maybe I do a little early lighting, and then someone else takes it over for me. And for 2 years, I would live in Unreal Engine making shaders, putting down like the first pass of environments, kind of figuring out where assets would go and just iterating quickly. I got a really good, and I did that for a couple years and I really enjoyed it. And then I got an offer I couldn't turn down here in Nashville. And I came out here to work as a senior environment artist. That was my first senior position. I came out here to work for a company called Traega. And at my current job, although I can't say too much about the specific project, it is an Unreal game. And I do more of what I consider the fun stuff and what I trained in when I was younger, and more in line with the classes I'm teaching. I make models, I texture them, I iterate, I make props, I bring them into Unreal Engine. I get to do a little bit of effects stuff, but really we have an effects guy. And, it's just back and forth iterating, making a bunch of stuff. That's what I'm doing right now.
Cool.
Awesome. So could you talk a little bit about your workflow that you use?
Yeah, sure. It's interesting because, there's probably some parts of my workflow that, maybe the industry might have upgraded. The industry might have moved on a little bit. I don't know. I'm always trying to kind of evaluate that. But, because when I started out, just to take an opportunity to tell my old man game art stories here. When I started out, and I don't know when you guys got into all this stuff, right? But when I started out, it was you use 3D Studio Max. How are they numbering them then? I think it was like 3D Studio Max 18 or something, or 4, or I don't know, whatever they were using in like 2008 was the version the school had. And what you would do is you'd export a 2D picture of your UVs and you would paint on it in Photoshop. And then you would reload the texture in Max. And then you'd look at it and ponder it. And then you'd go back to Photoshop and you'd paint highlights with your hand, and your little tiny Wacom, the school that you have. And that's how, and then you would make a specular map. And so it changed so much. And that was kind of the cool part about Vertex for me when I came in as a student years ago was, I get how 3D works, but there's a couple things that are kind of gone and old. And that's when I kind of developed into my current PBR flow that I think works really well. And we all, I think most of us have a hard time tooting our own horn a little bit. But for the most part, work is going really well. And people like the speed that I'm making stuff. We can iterate and, we make fun stuff that looks really cool and we make it quickly. It may not be perfectly clean. So I just want to, give you the whole background on that before I kind of go into what my workflow is. But generally, if I'm making something organic, we'll say a stone statue, just as an example, I will do everything from take a royalty-free turbo squid model or something and, put some stuff in it in Max. It's really simple. Remesh it in ZBrush or Dynamesh it, sculpt a little bit of damage into it, but not any kind of detail that I wouldn't be able to, I wouldn't put in any of the detail that I could do with like Substance Painter or the shader graph in Unreal. I'll get a really quick bake. I'll get a really quick texture on it, and I will throw that thing in Unreal, and I will do that in a period of 1 to 2 days. And it's not going to have perfect unwrap. It's not going to have perfect geo, but we get to look at stuff with surfaces in the game, put some simple lights on it. We get to explore it. And then we'll talk about, oh no, we realized, the lead designer says this isn't going to work because it's too tall. The player can't walk up to it or whatever. That's just a made up example. And then, then we'll go back, and when we redo it to better standards, we'll take more time. We'll have a cleaner unwrap. We'll make sure we have quads if we need it. If I'm doing something hard surface, I still really like to do rough and tough. I like to work fast and make a lot of stuff and not sweat it if I go back and have to do that. Like, I know I'm doing that portion of my work over. So that when I really do get into spending 3 weeks on one asset, I've learned what I need to know so that that asset isn't the one you have to redo. Right. I'm sure all of you guys have made something that you worked on for 2 months and then it's just gone. It's not used. So the way I work, I try to avoid that pretty aggressively. But, like hard surface, I'll do, if I were making a French fountain, in a like one of those beautiful courtyards in a city in France, I will just find some vector design and import it into Max, and you just extrude it into geometry, bend it around a roughly looking fountain shaped bowl, and put the turbo squid person on top of it, slap a marble texture on all of it. We'll figure out if we like it, and then I'll start really getting the proportions right and then sculpting it in. And And I also like playing with the shader graph a lot. I'm not doing that a lot right now, but hopefully soon. So hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that really does. It's really interesting to hear how you're working in kind of a pre-visualization kind of way, in a way that's kind of like, I don't know, low risk almost. So, I mean, if there's something that you don't want to use, you can just kind of be like, well, it wasn't that long anyway, kind of thing. So that's interesting. That's really interesting.
I should say also that I work for a indie-sized studio. We are an indie studio. I think we're like 20 people, 30 people. And, I don't know what the official number is. And we are in, the very early stages of our unnamed, undisclosed project. That's why I wanted to mention the Pixelmondo stuff. I know a lot of our students that get their first job, they might start at Ubisoft, they might start it wherever. And the bigger the studio, the more specialized you're probably going to be. And, I started out probably just my boss, awesome dude, guy named Assad Manzour. He's worked with him very closely for a couple of years. Other people too, Zach and oh man, I'm forgetting other people's names, but I probably worked the most with Assad. But I remember my first assignment was, here is a 4 million polygon mesh. Import this, figure out how we can get this thing to work in Unreal, because it's a scan of it's a literal scan of the mountains of Mars. I think it's just on the Quixel pack, but all I'm doing is importing an asset. And I was placing assets, and then, I was very hyper focused. I was in Unreal. I was not a modeling guy. I was not a prop guy. I was not, so I was making shaders in Unreal, and I was doing like environment layout early stuff. And then the creative decision comes from some guy in Hollywood or whatever. But, I'm the guy in the pit clicking the button to put it there, So it was a different experience to what I have now. If you go to a smaller studio, I think I prefer the experience. It was awesome to say I got to work on Star Trek because I'm a big Trekkie, but I really like the indie game experience where you get to wear more than one hat. You get to flex your modeling, you get to flex your texturing, you get to flex your, the one time you coded a light pattern on a casino machine and people are like, how do you know how to do this? That's a lot of fun, I gotta say.
Awesome. Very cool. Okay. So, thanks for sharing a little bit of insight into what you do in your workflow and things like that. It's really cool. So the next thing that I'd like to maybe do is I couldn't help but notice the Darkwing Duck jet on your portfolio, which I thought was pretty fantastic. I was wondering if you could just kind of talk through that a little bit and just kind of, give us your mindset, what you were thinking as you were working on the project.
I was thinking, let's get dangerous.
Yes.
When there's trouble, you call DW. Man, I'll tell you where that project got started. I didn't do it this last time. I'm doing it again for this class. But last time, and not a prop like the Darkwing Duck jet, so I'm glad you asked about that one.
Yeah.
But I frequently I'll just go to Artstation and I'll browse when I'm talking to the students, and I'll be like, hey guys, if you want to get on Artstation to be trending, and then I'll go look at what is trending, and it's usually these really beautiful props with attention. They're clean. They got attention to detail, even if it's a dirty prop. It's clean, and there's surface variation, and there's reflections that are done tastefully, and it's not overblown, and they've got the key and the rim and the fill light, and they get a lot of things right, and they don't make a lot of mistakes that people normally do when they start out at rendering. And I try to break those Artstation posts down for the students, because I hate it when I used to hate it when I was starting out, and all my stuff looks so amateur, far worse than what any of the students are throwing at me now when they start out. Making assets with 512 textures in Photoshop and not really understanding art theory and stuff like in color theory or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
My early stuff was so bad, and I'd look at the pro stuff and I'd be like, what? Like, that's so far away. Am I ever going to get there? So I try to take that stuff and break it down to the students. Like, you can get here. It will take time and work, but here's what that entails. And looking at all these, these really sexy props all the time, I was just like, dude, I just need to do one in my spare time. I need to push myself a little bit harder. And so I was like, well, I'm going to make a thin refractive material. I still have some problems with it, but I'm going to make a thin refractive material, and I'm going to make this plastic that's got a little subsurface. Everybody expects it on a wax candle. Everybody expects it on the block of marble, So I was like, I'm going to make something that I loved when I was a kid, so that there's a real motivation behind this. And I grew up with Darkwing Duck. I had that jet when I was a kid. I watched the cartoon every Saturday morning and all that. And I don't still have it, so I had to look up like eBay listings, just like we tell our students to do. But yeah, and then I knocked it out quicker than I thought I would. I was like, what? I have gotten better at modeling. Of course, I was like, well, I guess I can do this now or something. And I was like, well, I'm going to start throwing crap in the background. So I started filling out the room, and I would have gone even further if I hadn't gotten my current job and moved. I knew I wasn't going to have more time. I'm settled again now, but so I started filling it with just, free stuff online, Quixel stuff. And I even stole a couple students' props. I don't think it's in the render on Artstation, but somebody made a Nintendo DS and I tossed it in there, even though it's not 90s, but I thought it was kind of funny. There's the pouch. If you look, the pouch we give students, I put that in there.
Yeah.
I
textured that. There's some other crap, but yeah. So that's the Darkwing Duck scene.
Cool. Yeah. That turned into a really gorgeous scene. You mentioned the speed at which you were going. So, I mean, about how long did it take you to finish up that project? How long did you spend on that?
I'll tell you what, I think it was probably around 2 months. And I'll bet I could look at when I made the first file and when I made the last file, because I am on my little, so it says Darkwing Duck Jet. And if I organize this by date, and I have to do this kind of stuff at work all the time. It's like, when did how do I know this is the right file? Like, if I screw up and I don't organize something right. So I want to say it was like, so I finished in September and I made a reference board in October. So October 31st is when I last updated my reference board. No, I had a version. So it was like It was like middle of August, I want to say.
Ah, okay.
Yeah,
So
I
it's
was gonna
like-
say like 2 terms ago, I remember you working on it, and I was like, I can't wait to see that's done.
Heck yeah, that's cool. I didn't remember that. Yeah,
Wasn't Darkwing Duck like a game on NES too, or am I thinking of
Was it?
something else?
it
May-
probably was. It probably
could've been.
was. I didn't have that one, but there had to be. There had to be. Like it was. They're making games of all the cartoons on the Genesis and the NES, right?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. It was like they were always coming out. Cool. All right. So we're gonna move the conversation a little bit into deeper waters. So I'm just gonna take a second and put my floaties on here.
Oh boy.
So I was just kind of curious about I guess you would call it AI art and using things like Midjourney to generate artwork. And I was just kind of curious if you had any experience with it and kind of get your thoughts on it.
Yeah. So I have to say that I've done research into it, how it works, and like where it sources the art from and the controversy. I've looked into that pretty deeply. I am not an expert in using like prompting the AI. I don't have a Midjourney, like I'm not in the Midjourney Discord yet. Probably will at some point. I've used the easy, I don't know what you would say, the lesser one. It's called the Crayon. Like it's free and you can just punch it in. Like the Midjourney or higher quality, and you can pay for render time or something. I don't really know exactly. At first, when it started happening, I was kind of just like, okay, this is neat. I knew this was coming. AI can generate some images and, cool. And then I start to think about it a little more and I'm like, well, if you can make a really good concept just by kind of typing it in, that might cut a few concept artist jobs, and that sucks. And then these images start getting really, really good. And I'm like, man, I know there's limits. I know everything's got 8 fingers, and the like eyes are really weird and lifeless, but you can work that stuff out. And I'm kind of thinking, at first I was thinking of it from the angle of, what's it going to do to the industry? Like all the industries, like, what industry wouldn't be impacted by AI? It's a lot of them.
Yeah.
Maybe most commerce on the planet could be impacted by this stuff. I don't know. But the first time I really had to sit down and come to grips with it and think about it was when I encountered the Artstation protest. Because my first thoughts were kind of, I wasn't for AI, I wasn't against AI. That's probably still where I'm at, but the general tone like on Artstation is AI art sucks, remove AI art, it's not art, and the art it creates is stealing from people. And I'm like, well, that's not fair. Is it really doing that? And I looked into it, and these are just my thoughts on it. There could be some things I'm wrong about on this, but my general understanding is that AI art and other AI works the same way, but it takes the sum of human knowledge that's been stored on the internet, or the sum of human media. In our case, these Artstation images that we post for people to look at, and whatever other areas they're pulling from, DeviantArt, Imgur, whatever, who knows. And through some really ingenious programming and rendering tricks and stuff that I don't understand. I'm not a programmer. I'm not an engineer. They can take like millions of images and they can sort of average them together in a way that makes sense based on the words you put in. But what this AI is not doing is we didn't program a science fiction computer brain. We don't have a science fiction computer brain that exists right now that people know about. It's a huge database of images or text or whatever, and it puts things together in a way that most of the time us humans looking at the output are like, oh, that's interesting. But currently it can only exist from the work that people have created and then gets harvested and put into this machine.
Mhm.
So I kind of wanted to go two places with this. I don't want to just go all over the place randomly, just ranting here. There's ethical concerns about the use of AI,
Mhm.
and there's practical considerations for you, whoever is listening to this podcast in the future, or maybe you're live with us, in that, is this can you make money in this industry? You should be paying attention. I understand that concern. The first one I'll go to is the ethical one. I don't think someone should prompt an AI image and then say, hey, look, I made this castle. And then not elaborate.
Mhm.
I don't think it's tantamount to plagiarism, but man, it's a new frontier. It's like, did you though, or did you type in the word, make me a pretty castle?
Right. Yeah,
What-
absolutely.
Someone that's listening, go punch that in and see what kind of result it gives you. But
well, that's an interesting point because there's authorship, right? And then I guess now authorship has become a very blurry line where we're all kind of participating in this sort of weird hive mind event, right? So I mean, if you go into Midjourney and you don't even type anything, you're just in the Discord. I mean, the amount of visual information that's constantly scrolling through through your monitor is intense. I mean, it can give you sensory overload with the amount of people that are in there generating imagery. And when you think about that, I mean, I think the algorithm, I mean, it's just taking it all in like a sponge, right?
Yeah.
And that's something that's really fascinating to me. Another point that I think about a lot is when the camera was invented.
Yeah.
And then, you would have artists that were painstakingly rendering, images with, like horsehair and grease, basically, with pigment in it. And then here comes this guy and he's like flashing a bulb. And then, a day later you get an image, right? So, and I mean, are we at that similar kind of moment with AI art? I think that's, a sort of a valid question.
I think it's a very valid question. I think it's the closest thing we can get if we need an example to previously, like from history, to look back on. I think that's the closest one we have, because it must have seemed like magic to the people that started seeing these things. Imagine, maybe living in a place that a single mirror is expensive.
Yeah.
You might not even see yourself that often unless you're looking in water that's really perfectly still, which doesn't always happen every day. It's like, and then you see a color photograph. Like it must have seemed, and then imagine being an artist and then seeing a color photograph, and it's like, well, no one's ever going to pay me to make art again.
Yeah.
That, of course, was unfounded, but did it change the maybe the demographics? Like there's probably less painters and sculptors as a percentage nowadays. Like, so maybe I don't know exactly where I'm going with that. So I'll try to bring it to a point in that I think that's the concern. Like if we're going from the, if we go to the practical stuff now, it's like, can I make a job making video games going forward in the future? Yes, I do believe so. But I do not make a living hand painting textures in Photoshop anymore. That job is gone, and there wasn't a huge planet changing technology behind it. There's people still want things that computers can't make in half a second. There's so much value in that. Whatever computers become good at cranking out 1,000 times a second, whatever you can do that the computer can't will be the valuable thing. I don't know exactly what that thing's going to be.
Yeah. I think that's a good point for sure. And I mean, you still see, I think, among people a desire for, I guess, handcrafted. I guess you would consider something that's, I don't know, photo bashed together, right? Like a current concept art workflow or something like that. Necessarily handcrafted, but I mean, there's a lot of creative decision making that happens in that process, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it all kind of depends on what you said. I couldn't agree with you more. And you know, the photograph, you were right. I mean, I think you made a really good point. Like the camera didn't completely replace
Yeah.
handmade items, right?
But it
So
might have felt that way for a
yeah,
while. Like, imagine electricity is starting to become commonplace. You know, I in areas not related to anything that would be of interest to Vertex, just there, I've seen people discuss how frightening technology can be as it advances.
Yeah.
So, and what was, you know, I'll have to see if I can find this article. I had them in a list. There were like 12 of them, but I remember a couple. But this happens with a lot of technologies. The fright over them
mhm,
coming into existence. There were there was a large propaganda campaign against electricity.
Oh yeah.
People would draw, you know, somebody would pay to have pamphlets made of, you know, people getting tangled up walking in the street on these power lines. And like, you know, I think probably most people have heard about Thomas Edison zapping an elephant.
Yep.
But you know, electricity, you know, people were like, get this dangerous menace out of our lives.
mhm.
And then um, phone companies tried to do the same thing when the internet was starting, because all of a sudden you could imagine this mysterious future where you could talk to someone and see a video of their face without using a phone company. Wouldn't that be wild?
And
And
not get charged a long distance fee.
there's no long distance. Probably most of you watching don't know what a long distance fee
Oh.
is, and you never got grounded for talking to a girl after 8 p.m. or something.
No.
So, but yeah,
Nice.
so I don't think AI is going to have a small impact. I do think it's going to be huge. I do think our jobs will change. I don't think it's going to necessarily be quite like Star Trek holodecks, but why wouldn't that be the future we end up in at some point? Like, if anything is preventing us from doing that, it's probably from making a physical hologram. Like, if that, I don't know if
Yeah.
that's scientifically physically possible. You know, but
Mhm.
in terms of, you know, talking to a computer and having it make a fully realistic video that's more or less exactly what you wanted, that seems like it's just coming at some point.
Are you
So
thinking like AR?
yeah, you know, like it, and I'm just kind of trying to reduce it down in my brain. You know,
Yeah.
if a computer can make a really realistic image using its bank of input, why
Yeah.
couldn't make why couldn't it eventually make a realistic 3D model?
Mhm.
You
Oh,
know,
absolutely.
why
Yeah.
couldn't it eventually make a puzzle? Why couldn't it eventually make all these other things? And I think, you know, you had a really interesting way of putting it at the start of the podcast. What did you say? Did you say director or conductor? Author? You said author.
Mhm.
Yeah, like, do you have ideas that are interesting to others? If you do have that and you find a way to get it out with whatever's available to you at the time, you will always
Mm.
be desired by others in some way,
Mm.
by the market,
Yeah.
whatever you want to say.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. And just speaking to this, I think it's a really great time to segue into the conversation about NeRFs, the
Oh.
neural radiance fields.
Yeah.
So, I mean, with NeRFs, you drop an image bank in, and then the algorithm is able to put together what appears to be a 3D environment based on the images, right? And it kind of fills in the blanks too. So I think it ends up being point cloud data, like meshes
Mm.
based on point clouds, that kind of thing. But the speed and the processing of it is something that's really interesting. And another thing that's really interesting, something that I just found in 2022, Time Magazine ranked it as one of the most important inventions of the year.
Really?
I did not know that. I didn't know that the NeRFs, the neural radio fields or whatever. What is it? What is it again? Neural
Radiance field.
radiance fields.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I knew 3D was coming at some point. I didn't know they were called NeRFs until we talked about doing this podcast. I went and did some brief research, went and checked out the NVIDIA site. And of course, the best results are on there and they're still kind of glitchy. You know, that's where I kind of got that hologram comment I just made. You know, right now, you were talking about you drop in some images and they come from a couple angles. And then we have the magic of AI that, or whatever, you know, or the Radiance field that fills in the gaps, and it's being trained to make things that look accurate or that humans like until it is good. So, you know, it's at a point right now where you need a few images to drop in, but I wouldn't be surprised if a few years from now it's like, you know, make me a house. You know, what would Hogwarts look like in the middle of Washington, D.C.? Go, and it'll just do it. Like, that's coming at some point, right?
Right. Yeah.
And
the text prompts for 3D renderings, right? And objects.
Yeah, I don't know how fast that comes, but it might freak us out. Now, it doesn't mean your 3D modeling skill is worthless, and I actually should get into that here in a second. But you know, well, screw it, I'll get into it right now. Basically, you know, because this isn't Joe Rogan where we can go like 5 hours, right?
Right.
I mean, we could. I don't know how many people would stick around, but you know, here's the thing. So I got a job as an Unreal generalist at Pixelmondo, right? And I am, if we go back 40 years ago and I have the closest possible job to that, what am I doing? And I don't know exactly what that is, but I would think, I mean, I don't know what you guys think, but it would probably be, I'm a guy in the background on the set. I got the stick and I'm holding up the light behind Captain Kirk. And, you know, I have to go to the craft store and I make the computer that Spock will smash with his fists. Or whatever. And if I could see into the future as that person, you know, a lot of those jobs are going to be gone forever, because why would you do some of these things when you could do it cheaper, it looks better and faster on a computer? But there still is someone doing that stuff. I think, you know, it's going to be a long time before, you know, it's not going to be a long time before someone can say, hey, what does Hogwarts look like in the middle of Washington, D.C.? But it probably is, I'm sure it's a long time before something automated can do that. And it's clean enough to be used in a game. And it works in a game or a movie or a show or a project in a way that makes sense. I guarantee you, if I'll get like 5 years from now, you will probably be able to do that. You know, make me Hogwarts in DC, but you'll open the door and it'll be like those old Looney Tunes cartoons where there's a brick wall, you know, or like, you know, there'll be 8 bathrooms surrounding one bedroom, or, you know, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, totally. The anomaly, right?
You'll be needed to clean this stuff up and to make it work and make it human, you know, for a long time.
Well, that's the thing too. I mean, if you look at other data capture systems, right? If you look at motion capture, typically there's some sort of cleanup that's involved in that, right? If you look at photogrammetry, typically there's some cleanup involved. I think that, you know, you can get the technology to be pretty close, but I mean, it seems like there always has to be some form of refinement. Like there has to be a guy or lady or somebody that goes in there and says, like, okay, so that's not quite right. And I think that that's the point you're touching on here, where it's like, you know, you open a door and it doesn't make sense when you open the door, right? So
yeah, but it technically satisfies what it thinks humans want, sort of, but it's not a human that has lived a life that walks through buildings and really understands. Maybe it gets there kind of at some point, but yeah. So even then, whatever you can do that some automated process can't, you know, and if you enjoy doing that thing, make a living with it. And I don't want to jump ahead if you don't want to, but there was something in the outline we looked at where it was like, what would I recommend as like career advice for, what would I have done differently?
Mhm.
Even though we didn't have the crazy AI stuff when I was starting out, then we did have rapidly changing technology. I think that will persist until after we're gone,
Oh, no,
So,
absolutely.
so we can't apply that we can't apply that kind of mindset to it. Here's what I would do for you guys starting out now, and here's what I would have told myself to do differently. I would, and I said this in my first ever interview with Vertex, and I tell it to the students all the time, and I'll just repeat it. It'll be my thing. Be prolific, make a ton of art, and learn new processes, and don't worry about not finishing them. I'm not going to try to figure out screen sharing right now, but I'll bet you guys are exactly the same way. If I go to my art projects folder that I think I have 85 folders in here, and there are about 6 completed projects.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. Yeah.
like if you see something on TV or in God of War and you're like, they have a glowy fire leaf bush. I don't know. Like it's whatever.
Right.
How would I, and you're a character artist and you've never made foliage, but you kind of think you could pull it off and it might be fun. Well, spend your Friday night doing that instead of just playing God of War. And, just be prolific, make a ton of stuff. Don't be ashamed of your art, especially when it's bad. Get it in front of someone that is better than you, that will be honest with you, and do that as much as you freaking can. Do it constantly, and you will look back in a couple of years and you'll be like, I don't know that artist anymore. I show at the end of the course, I always show the students my first portfolio, and it's hysterical. It's hysterical. So I want all you guys, I want all my students to do that quicker. I don't want them to have to take a decade like I did.
Yeah, no, heck yeah, absolutely. I do that sometimes too, because sometimes students will get overwhelmed or frustrated or something like that, and I'll be like, but you guys are doing okay. And then I'll show them an early piece that I did where I was just figuring this stuff out on my own. And I'm like,
I'm glad you do it too. Okay, that's good.
Yeah,
That's
good. I would go to like Barnes and Noble, right? And back when there were Barnes and Nobles, and I would hunt around for Maya books, and there would be a Maya book like this thick, and I would just sit there, and look through it and that kind of thing. Or if I could find video tutorials online with like on DVD, that like get those. And so
that's awesome.
It's like, I mean, I put out so much bad 3D art when I first started, and just always trying to get better kind of became the focus. And I mean, it's not an overnight process, and I think that that's something that's important to remember.
Yeah, you have to make bad art to get good. There's no other way.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what the computers are doing.
Yeah, exactly.
So they're making 8-finger hands,
I gotta say, it's funny that as digital artists, we're hearing all of the other digital artists saying like, "Oh, it's gonna kill our careers, it's gonna kill our jobs." Do you remember when Photoshop first came out and we started seeing splash art done? People were like, "Oh, traditional art's dead. We're never gonna paint again. This is absolutely horrible." And then now we're at the point where like traditional art's still there, but now we're doing all this really nice stuff on the computer, and now we're getting threatened.
That's a good point. What it ended up being was there's just more people that can be creative, because Photoshop came out, and I remember using Photoshop 4 in high school. And like you remember your buddy had the version of Photoshop or whatever on the DVD RW or whatever. And I tried it out at school, and I learned it and I wanted to make video games, but it's not like I would have been an oil painter if that hadn't existed. I don't think. Like, so what ends up happening is there just ends up being more people that can be creative. And that's what I hope is going to happen here. People are going to want games that are made properly. If you can crank out 1,000 AI games a day, it's just like, well, I want one that was made by a real person because it's going to be better.
Yeah, I mean, having those custom interactions in a game, and when you think about, I don't know, any type of studio project, right? Even if it's an indie or a AAA studio, the amount of polishing that goes into that, right? And I think that even if it gets to a point where there's an algorithm just like spitting out video games, there still has to be a polish, I think, because the computer doesn't know how it feels, right?
Yeah.
It just understands what to do if given a command, and I think that's the big difference.
Yeah. It's going to remember you said that 20 years from now.
Exactly.
It's going to turn off your air conditioning in the pod. It's just going to turn it off. No, but yeah, I agree. There's always going to be something that the machine can't do. And I know I've repeated that 3 times now, but yeah, like I think that's the important thing, because, you know, it is good to be paying attention to this stuff. Yeah. There probably are going to be less people paying for simple concepts. You know, your napkin sketch can become real very fast now. Mm-hmm. Your napkin idea can become very real now, but doesn't mean there's no need for art. There's a lot we can do. And yeah, I would just make a lot. The times I did that are when I improved the most. So, you know, I do, you're right, Paul. I see a lot of students getting frustrated, and I don't blame them. I mean, do you remember the first time you looked at Max or Maya or whatever, you know, whatever modeling program is yours? Like, I remember the first time I looked at Max, and I just, you know, that's the other thing. I thought I was going to be using all of those tools when I was, you know, in my head, when I'm a professional, and, you know, as a kid thinking about me being a professional, I was thinking I would have to be using all these things and technos in my headphones, and I'm just really fast. And it's kind of like that, except I only use like 6 things, you know, instead of all the tools that are available. So, you know,
it's kind of like the ultimate 3-chord band, right? It's like, yeah, you have those 3 chords, but you can really use those 3 chords.
I'm really good at my 3 chords. Yeah, that's basically what I'm doing. Yeah.
Right on. Well, I think that there's definitely skill in that too, right? So, okay. In terms of, making a lot of stuff and that kind of thing. And, you know, I did have the opportunity to sit in one of your classes, and the student work that's coming out of the game art program, I think is really fantastic.
Awesome.
I think you do a great job with the students, Andrew. So
thanks, bro.
Yeah, it's really cool to see it, especially when they post in the channel and stuff like that. It's, you know, stuff looks really gorgeous. When folks get to that, you know, the end of that term, right, and they're ready to kind of try to make their foray into the industry, right? So this is always a topic that I've found really interesting, is, you know, that transition from when you go from a student to a professional. And I was just wondering, you know, if you could just spend a couple minutes talking about what that was like for you.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm talking to a few students right now. They're trying to get their foot in the door. One student, Madeline, she's one of my first students, and she's cool. She's busting her butt. Her work's improving all the time. But one thing she does not have a problem with, that I have seen people have a problem with, and the reason I thought of her and I'm bringing her up, is people will be so desperate to get their foot in the door that they will accept conditions that are completely unreasonable. So I would say, going from being a student to getting your foot in the door, maybe you have to make concessions. Maybe you don't make as much money or live in the exact place you want when you start out. Those are reasonable. Yeah. But do you sign a contract where someone owns everything creative you make for 2 years, and you have to work for free? And, you know, like, there's this odious NDA, and like don't do that. Like, have some respect, you know. I remember when I worked, they're gone now. So there's a new version of them, but it's not the same thing. When I worked at THQ as QA, it was technically my first game job. It was in Phoenix. I didn't have to move anywhere. I just needed some money until I got a 3D art job at a place called 3G Studios. This was in 2010 and 11. I worked at THQ, and I remember someone got mad at me because I went up to the bathroom to go take a leak. And, you know, I looked at that guy and I was like, dude, I'm leaving, and I'm going to come back, and then we can test the game, and they're going to send us a new build in 10 minutes anyway. And like, none of the work we just did is going to matter, but I'm going to go to the bathroom because my effing health is more important than like so do not get walked on. A lot of the creative types are like, oh, I just want to make art. Do not, and I get it. I was there too, but you know, that would be one thing. And with that out of the way, it ties into the next thing, which is imposter syndrome. I think everybody's heard of it, right? Like
Yeah.
pretty much everybody's heard of imposter syndrome. You do always have new things you need to learn. But at the same time, if you can fully go through the process of modeling, unwrapping, texturing, also modeling a second version of the model, you paint it, you bring it into a video game engine, that level of comprehension, you are more intelligent when it comes to 3D rendering than 99% of the planet. You are an expert. Maybe you can't make money yet, but you are still an expert and you should hold your head high over that. Now get good enough to make money doing it, and then it goes into being prolific. So that in a roundabout way was my transition into the industry. I go work in QA as soon as I graduate while I'm trying to find my real job.
Mhm.
And they treat you like a slave sometimes. And then you go and you get your first 3D job, and people are like, man, I can't believe they treated you like that. And you end up, your bright-eyed, bushy-tail attitude ends up being really useful. And, you can make a bunch of really cool art and just don't lose that. So, and I started out kind of at a smaller indie studio. So I got to wear a bunch of hats right away. My boss was like, okay, make these particle effects for this casino game. And I'd never used Unity. I'd never made a particle effect, but they just let me sit there and figure it out. And it was awesome. And all of a sudden I could say I'm a VFX artist technically,
Yeah.
put it on my resume, but it was awesome. It was awesome. That was my transition. So, just learn new stuff all the time and relish it. If you don't enjoy it, go do something you don't enjoy, but for a lot more money. Like if you don't enjoy it, you
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Oh yeah. There has to be some passion there, I think.
For sure.
Cool. All right. Paul, do you have any questions for Andrew?
Not so many questions. I gotta say, you hit a chord when you were talking about Madeline and not like giving into those like weird requests from bosses. I don't know if you've ever run into this before, but like a contract that basically absorbs all of your intellectual property as you work for them, whether you're on duty, off duty. And I looked at the person who was like handing me the contract. I'm like, who in their right mind would sign this? And they're like, and they pointed out to the office next to them, like all those people out there. I was like, why?
Good
Why
people
would
that
you
don't
do
know
that?
better. People that, young kids and people that just don't know better. And, we've been through it now, and we can warn our Vertex family. But
Yeah.
that's the answer to that, is people that don't know better.
Yeah. It's amazing how people would give into a contract like that. And it's like you said, you have to have respect for yourself. You can't just say, all right, you know what? I'm making the good stuff. That's what I want. This is what I wanted to do the whole time. I'm glad you preach that to the students as well, because it's awesome that they get that experience, because the first time they go into an office, they're like, you know what, maybe my first job, I have to take this, I have to do this. And next time I won't. And
Yeah.
you're just setting themselves up for failure for next time.
Yeah. And there are realistic concessions. Maybe you want to stay in your town, but maybe you have to move to Austin instead. But it's a reasonable industry standard job offer. Go ahead and take that. But, the stuff me and Paul were just talking about, like, don't let someone try to own your art for the next 10 years or some crap. Come to us, check with other people. We'll try to point you to someone that can help you at the very least. So
absolutely. Yeah, I think that's something that's really, really nice about the courses is, the students get to work with mentors that are in a position to answer questions like that and to deal with issues like that, for sure. So I think that's really super helpful. And another thing is, if there's a company that's trying to lock down intellectual property for 10 years or whatever, while there's an algorithm just pumping out data at like an alarming rate. I mean, I think it calls into a larger question. It's like, what the heck is intellectual property anyway at this point?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that having some ownership, it goes back to the larger question about our authorship, right? And what that's going to mean maybe in the next 10 years or something like that. But I mean, it just kind of makes you wonder about like what they think they're going to own in 10 years by making someone sign a contract like that.
Yeah. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out. you made me think of something. I can't remember exactly what you just said, but you made me think of something. And the other thing that I would push on people that are trying to get in, and that's our target audience, right? You know, all you guys listening are probably trying to get into one of these industries. Don't shy away. You know, here's a reasonable concession. You know, let's say you have started down this game industry path because you want to be the lead character concept artist for Square Enix. You go get that, bro. But that is not going to be your first job. So, you know, what you can do is look at all the other 3D jobs. When I found Vertex, I was doing government military training simulations. Some of that was pretty cool. Some of it was pretty lame, but the pay was fine. The benefits were great, better than most game companies. And I made awesome friends. I met my wife moving to North Carolina. You know, it was like, I was not asked to do anything unreasonable. They flew me to some business meetings. I stayed at the Ritz once to do a presentation, and I was like, I'm a redneck. Like, I never thought I'd be doing this stuff. You know, I'm like, what am I doing here? I got khakis from Walmart, dude. But, you know, like, so, and that was because I was willing to go through the process of applying for not game jobs. So there's like training sims, there's like people making programs for, you know, law enforcement. There's people making programs for, I had a coworker that worked for Lockheed Martin, or was it Boeing? I think it was Boeing. But, you know, he, you know, they have those cockpit training simulators. All these things need very precise art that doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily pretty, but it has to be exact. Like we're not putting the AI on the cockpit of a 737 right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So those jobs can pay well. They can be awesome. You know, go make some art that isn't your favorite for a slot machine company or something. Like, do you want to do that the rest of your life? Maybe not. But, you know, can you make some money while you're improving yourself? Like, sure. So don't give up. If you apply at Ubisoft, Electronic Arts, Naughty Dog, which is brutal. I learned some stuff about their art test, but, you know, if you get turned down for those, and I did, but I'm happily working in the game industry, making a decent wage, and everything's good. But, like, you know, don't give up because you didn't get Naughty Dog the first time you applied.
Oh, you've got to have a little bit of a tough skin, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
A little bit of grit goes a long way. I think that what you're bringing up too, Andrew, about sort of games adjacent job possibilities makes a ton of sense, especially if you consider all of the different industries that game engines are used in now, right? And I think that's just going to grow too.
You know, that's a fun one, dude. I'm glad you made me think of that, because, you know, games adjacent, when here we are talking about AI, and that was kind of the outline topic, and, you know, people are concerned about that, and I get that and all that. But I remember back in my day, we were worried, you know, because we were watching all the tech improve, and we were like, oh man, all this VFX art, you know, the VFX art is going to get the programs, the protocols, the technology is going to get so good, and, you know, they're gonna eat us. You know, people aren't going to want game art. They're going to be making games with these super pretty, whatever, you know, VFX programs. That's 12 years ago. That was the concern. And then I had a company hit up me to use the video game program to make a TV show. It was completely 100% flipped of what I was afraid of when I was a kid. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, like I'll make Star Trek with Unreal Engine. Yeah, dude, let's go. You know?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's probably most surprising, because, you know, one of the, you know, you used to work with mental ray, and like you're sitting there tweaking thousands and thousands of checkboxes, right?
Buckets.
But it's like, and you're like, but it looks so good. And then, you know, a few years later, it's like, hey, we're going to put this in a game engine, and we don't really have to wait for it to render at all. And it's like, you know, I understand that. I mean, Arnold can produce some really gorgeous renders, or, you know, there's some other ones out there, but I mean, what you can get instantly with a game engine, right, is pretty fantastic. I didn't think that, you know, we'd ever see the day, really, but it's pretty cool that it's here.
Yeah, it's I wouldn't have believed it. I mean, this fast it happened. Here we are. You know.
Absolutely. So we are at time right now, and Andrew, I really want to say thanks. I appreciate your time, taking the time out on a Friday afternoon to speak with us about your experience and some of the topics that are going on in 3D and technology.
Heck
And
yeah,
I
man.
want to thank Paul for helping me wrangle this thing together today. It was super helpful. So I hope everybody enjoys their weekend, and thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again next week. And Andrew, thanks again for your time. It was great meeting you, man, and hearing what you have to say. Okay.
Yeah, it was great getting a rant. And if any of our current students or future students are listening, don't be shy. I'm active on Discord. I usually can get around to you if it's later in the day. So, worst case, I can't get back to you because I'm out doing something. But you guys, don't be shy. Let's make some games together.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Awesome. All right.
Have a good one, guys.
Take care.
Have a good one. Bye.
Thank you.
Talk soon.